Hailing frequencies open, and welcome to Enterprising Individuals, the Star Trek discussion podcast that boldly goes into excruciating detail about the series, characters, and stories of the Star Trek universe. I'm your host, Aaron Coker, a.k.a. Caliban, and it doesn't matter how open-minded you are. If a man makes a recreation of the bedroom you slept in as a child, you phaser him right down to the ground. To the ground. It's creepy. I'm joined on this episode by Cassandra Rose Clarke. Cassandra is an author, poet, and educator, and the writer of speculative fiction novels like Our Lady of the Ice, The Mad Scientist's Daughter, and The Witch Who Came In From the Cold. Her most recent book, Forget This Ever Happened, is a sci-fi paranormal queer romance set in a Gulf Coast town that may or may not exist, and it's currently available wherever you buy books. Cassandra, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here. Permission to come aboard granted. Today we'll be talking about Rules of Acquisition, the 7th episode of the 2nd season of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. The Ferengi. Love them or hate them, you have to respect them. With minor cosmetic changes, antagonist races like the Klingons or the Romulans have changed a little in the 50-plus years of Star Trek media, but the Ferengi were the recipients of one of the greatest glow-ups in TV history, going from whip-wielding primitives to a race enjoying all the fruits of late-stage capitalism, like synthetic fabrics and small business ownership, to stark inequality and complete economic immobility. But just in case you're feeling like you're worth more than your market valuation, just remember the 109th rule of acquisition. Dignity and an empty sack is worth the sack. But we'll talk about that a little later in the show. First, Cassandra, it's great to have you on board, and I always ask first-time guests to the show how they first discovered Star Trek. How did you become a Star Trek fan?
So I watched it as a kid. I actually watched TNG. My dad would watch it, and I was just kind of in the room with him while he was watching it.
Yeah.
When I was very young.
Yeah.
So I actually didn't remember much about it other than the guy from Reading Rainbow was on it. So Geordi was my favorite character.
Sure.
Because I loved Reading Rainbow.
Yeah.
But I rediscovered it actually in graduate school. I just kind of went off on a wild tear and was like, I feel like watching Star Trek. I haven't seen that in years.
Yeah.
And I watched all of TNG, got obsessed, watched all of DS9, went back and watched some of the original series. I watched the animated series. So I just went through this phase where I just sort of binged all of Star Trek.
Yeah.
For like a year.
There's two things that I think of when I hear a story like that, and it's a common story. And one is that, like, it's amazing that Trek is so comprehensive in that it's something that you can be attracted to as a kid and enjoy, the space goings on. But then it's also something that is rewarding to return to as an adult and to understand better the emotions and the themes that they're exploring. And there are few things, I think, period, that really, allow you to do that. I'm sure that young kids today will get older and go back and watch something like Steven Universe and probably get more out of it than they did before, or certain cartoons or shows. But like Trek is really, I think, unique in that way.
Yeah, I agree. And I think also what's kind of cool about Trek is there's so many different iterations of it.
Yeah.
So like I went back to TNG because that was the one that I remembered watching, but there were so many other things. And this was also around the same time that the rebooted movie came out.
Right.
So that was getting me into the original series. And I was watching the movies, and there's just so many different versions of it that are all kind of different. While having that same sort of Trek core, which is really cool.
Yeah, that's really neat. And the other thing that I think is that it's, we live at a unique time where if you grew up and you did want to go back and revisit Trek, you have that opportunity with streaming service. Yeah, and it's not going to cost you hundreds of dollars to get all the DVDs and the Blu-rays. And there are, again, I think, few things that you can really do that with. I mean, there's a lot of things that are streaming now, but I like the idea of the soap Dark Shadows. I have seen a couple episodes, and a lot of my friends really like it, but I have no way to really watch Dark Shadows unless I drop, $250 on the box set that you can get on Amazon, because it's not really like streaming in a lot of places, and so it's so specifically positioned in a place where people can re-examine it and really dive into it.
Yeah.
And it's great for that reason. I think that the term speculative fiction was coined specifically for authors like you. Your bibliography contains space opera, fantasy, sci-fi, YA, pirate novels, sometimes all in one story. And when you have an idea and you sit down to write something, do you think, well, this is just a spy novel. This isn't weird enough. I need to put some witches in here.
Kind of. Actually, that is sort of how I work. I actually went to graduate school for creative writing. So I was trained in literary fiction and would write literary fiction. But every time I would all the stories I would turn in would always have some weird element to them. And I realized that deep down, I'm a science fiction writer.
Yeah.
But then I also like fantasy and I like horror, and so I really like the term speculative fiction because it just covers all of that. Yeah. And I don't have to sit there and try to define like what exactly I'm doing, because I just like to write weird stuff. So that's kind of what speculative fiction means.
Yeah. If somebody sees like a dragon or a winged beast, it's like, okay, fantasy. It's fantasy. It's like, I guess. Yeah. Have you met with resistance with your work in terms of publishers trying to market it in a particular genre?
Yeah, not really, actually, which kind of surprised me, just because when I was first getting published, there was a lot of talk about genre and all of that. But I think I kind of came in at the right time where we started to see a blending of genres. And we're really in a place now where I think genre divides have started to kind of dissolve. And so you do have actually a lot of literary fiction people who are like just wholeheartedly diving into speculative fiction or genre fiction.
Yeah.
Genre people who are crossing over to literary fiction. And it used to be those divides were very clear cut. Now they're not anymore. And so now there's this idea of like the writer as a genre.
Yeah.
And so I kind of got positioned that way, which was really cool.
Yeah. And I think readers benefit from that, especially with your incredibly creative work. Something that I really love about your work is that just the synopses or the concepts of your work are exciting and attractive. You know, it's one thing to say, okay, you know, Christine, Stephen King, The Car's Evil, got it. But for your book, Our Lady of the Ice, you know, it's about a female private investigator going up against mobsters and revolutionary androids in an Argentine domed Antarctic colony. It's like, whoa, stop drilling. You have hit oil. I want to read this book.
Yeah, I really like that sort of Twitter approach to describing your novel, where it's just like, how many cool things can I cram into the description? So that's kind of where I'm coming from. I'm
going to make this all hashtags, this description. You've got a master's in creative writing, as you mentioned, and you're putting it to good use. When did you decide to become a writing educator?
That was something that I kind of fell into in a way, just because when you have a graduate degree in creative writing, there's not a whole lot you can do with it in terms of having a job. But I found that I really loved teaching. I taught high school for a year, and that wasn't really my thing. But I transitioned into teaching college. I was a college adjunct for years, and I still do it a little bit. And I loved it. I loved that so much that I was able to kind of work towards that as my goal. And that was how I got involved with the nonprofit that I work with now. It was just because I really love teaching. And it's really satisfying. And I come from a family of teachers, so it was probably inevitable as well.
Yeah, I guess so. In addition to your original work, you're also a tie-in writer, having written the Halo Battleborn series. How'd you get involved with that?
So they actually reached out to me. The editor reached out to me actually because of Our Lady of the Ice. She had read it and enjoyed it. Oh. And they were looking for sort of new science fiction voices for the series. So she reached out to me. And I was really excited. I had played Halo in college. And it was one of the few video games that I was ever really into, because I'm not a big gamer. And so I was really excited. So all the video games you could have asked me to write for, like, this was the best one.
This was the one, yeah.
That was an invitation kind of thing, which was cool.
That's so great that they're looking to do that, because when you think about Halo, you think about, you know, dudes in Mountain Dew and playing Halo. And I would think that the tie-in books would be very similar, very white and male. And it's cool that they are reaching out to get other voices in there.
Yeah. Well, I think that's funny because that was never my experience with Halo.
Yeah.
so popular when I was in college that like everyone in the dorm was playing it. So
Sure,
it's like
sure.
I know it has that reputation, and I'm just like, where did that come from? Because that was my experience.
Yeah, and the Halo tie-in universe is huge.
Yeah.
There's a guy named David Bryan Gilbert who's a YouTube personality and a commentator for Polygon, and he made a YouTube video where he read through all of the canon Halo novels, which ended up being over 40 books, and he had planned the video would take a year to prepare, but of course he didn't plan on the pandemic happening. So the
Right.
video becomes this picture of a guy being literally trapped with this task that he set out for himself. And he's never actually played any of the games, so his understanding of the Halo universe comes just from the novels.
Oh wow. I think I saw that video. I think I saw part of it. One of my friends showed it to
Oh
me.
yeah. Well, he
Yeah.
does. Yeah, he says that that your two novels did a good job of showing the effects of the Covenant War on regular colonists.
Oh, awesome. That was my goal. So
Yeah, well, goal achieved. Your most anticipated tie-in, at least for Star Trek fans, would have to be your new Trek novel, Shadows Have Offended, which revolves around Troy, Crusher, and Worf in the final season of TNG. And as a Trek fan, you had to have been pumped to write this one.
oh yeah, I was thrilled. I actually was invited to write it because of my Halo books, which
Oh,
is kind of weird how that sort of domino effect happens.
yeah.
And I was just like, they asked me, they were like, "Hey, the editor was like, are you familiar with Star Trek?" And I was like, "Yeah, I like Star Trek." And then he asked, "Do you like TNG?" Or he asked me my favorite one, and I said TNG, and he was like, "Oh my God, that's perfect,"
Yeah.
because they were looking for someone to write a TNG story. So I was thrilled. It was like I never thought that I would get to write a Star Trek book. That was not something, that it was ever like one of my dreams or goals. I just didn't. I was like, you don't get to write Star Trek books. Like only really important people write Star Trek books. I'm never going to get to do that. So that was really exciting, and that it was TNG of all of them, since that was the one
Yeah,
that pulled me into Star Trek
yeah,
originally, was really cool.
that's great. You're seeing Trek publishing slowly but surely wake from its slumber with the release of the new Trek shows has been great. And specifically seeing non-CBS Trek stories like your book, David Mack's Kelvinverse novel, Alex White's Revenant has been great. Seeing that they're committed to still publishing stories, in the old familiar settings,
Right.
which of course the Star Trek Extended Universe novels have been built on for years and years. I know that you can't say anything, or you will be beamed into space immediately by your
Yeah.
masters. But the title of the book, Shadows Have Offended, obviously comes from Robin Goodfellow's speech at the end of Midsummer. So can we assume that this will be something of an epilogue for the characters involved in the story?
Maybe.
That's as close
It's
as I'm
hard
going to get.
to kind of explain why I chose that title
Yeah.
without giving away too much of the plot.
Okay.
But it was definitely there's a one of the main kind of through lines of the story is sort of has a dreamy
Oh,
quality. I'll say
okay.
that.
Okay.
That's kind of where it's coming from.
There's a little sneak peek there.
Yeah.
Your most recent novel, Forget This Ever Happened, revolves around Claire, a young girl in the mysterious Gulf Coast town of Indianola. And in the story, Claire falls in love with Julie, which is something of a surprise to Claire herself, who assumed that she was straight. And there's a powerful movement currently in fiction, and specifically in the YA community, that wants to see stories about race and LGBTQ characters by authors who themselves are racial or sexual minorities. Why is it important that that happens?
I mean, I think it's so that people can take control of their own stories.
Mm.
I know for me, I do identify as bisexual, so Claire's experiences were very much based on my own experiences in high school,
Yeah.
and kind of my desire to write a story or a book that I would have wanted to read then, or that I would have needed to read then. So I think that's where kind of the own voices stuff is coming from, is so that people, like I said, people can take control of their own narratives and share their own experiences without having somebody who hasn't had those experiences
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
tell you what they're supposed to be.
Yeah. I think it's really tough for people who sort of reside in the, larger space of being white or being hetero. It can be really tough for them to understand how important that is. And
Right.
it's one thing to not get it, but it's another thing to really resist it for some reason.
Yeah.
And that just seems to be, people can be just virulently resistant to initiatives like Own Voices. And so it's just, I find it mystifying, but then maybe at some point in my past, I wouldn't have understood it either.
Yeah.
Why did you choose this episode, Rules of Acquisition, to discuss today?
So I actually just chose it because I really like this episode.
Yeah.
That's kind of the main reason. I also chose it because it is related to my book, my Star Trek novel, but in
Oh,
kind of a spoilery way. I
okay.
don't want to get too much into it. But I was definitely inspired by this episode and kind of thinking about this episode while I was writing my book. So
Interesting.
that was kind of the other reason why I chose it.
Well, listeners will have to really scrutinize the rules of acquisition to see if they can get
Yeah.
any gems about what your book is about. I have to say that the Ferengi have really grown on me over the years. They're mostly an annoyance in TNG, and they're kind of one note. But of course, they're given room to expand in DS9. And I like that they're given funny things to do. I think that Star Trek has trouble with native comic situations sometimes. And putting the Ferengi in there and then having actors like Armin Shimmerman and Max Grodenchik and Cecily Adams playing these characters, they really elevate the material.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I mean, I'll be honest, I love the Ferengi episodes in DS9
Yeah.
because they're funny. And I do love seeing how the Ferengi were allowed to kind of evolve and become a
Yeah.
more complex race than they
Yeah.
are in TNG. Where they started off as being sort of, they were supposed to be the big, scary, like, thing placement. And they were just like, okay, it's like little weird whip guys.
Yeah. Right.
Kind of turn them into, I guess, just sort of one note joke race. But yeah, I really like how they took that kind of misstep, I guess, and they sort of vaulted it over into kind of creating these really complex, interesting characters, and the world building of sort of Ferengar and their culture is interesting to me.
Yeah, I love the fact that they apparently were supposed to be like the big bad, and they're like,
I
"Go
know.
on, get me a bunch of guys who are under 5'6". Let's make these guys really scary."
Yeah.
Well, we'll talk a little later in the show about the development of the Ferengi and their perception of the franchise. But first, I want to say that we are talking about the DS9 episode Rules of Acquisition, the 7th episode of the 2nd season of DS9. It first aired on November 6th of 1993. The teleplay is by Ira Stephen Bear, who needs little introduction on this show, but suffice it to say that he was an executive producer and the showrunner of DS9. And the story is by Hilary Bader. Hilary Bader's life was tragically cut short in 2002 when she died of metastatic breast cancer, but she was a lifelong Star Trek fan and wrote 8 episodes of the franchise from TNG to DS9 to Voyager. She also wrote several episodes of Xena Warrior Princess and wrote the Star Trek Borg and Star Trek Klingon games, as well as many, many episodes of the DC animated universe, shows like Superman the Animated Series, the new Batman Adventures, Batman Beyond, and the Zeta Project. And I think for a lot of people, it's cool to write for like a TV show or a movie. You wouldn't think that writing for a video game would be all that great, but like the fact that they, probably approached her and went, "We know you know this stuff. We know you're solid. Can you write Star Trek Klingon and Star Trek Borg and make them comprehensive?" I think that's a real like gold star for her.
Oh yeah, for sure.
The episode was directed by David Livingston, and any given episode, it's a good bet it's directed by Livingston. He's the most prolific director in the franchise, with 62 episodes directed of the various TOS spin-off series. The star date for the episode is unknown. We don't know. And your assignment, Cassandra, if you can, is to give us a 25-word synopsis of Rules of Acquisition.
25 words. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I can do that without a counter, just speaking.
Give us a pitch.
Yeah, so I guess the pitch would be that Quark is tasked with expanding the Ferengi Empire into the Beta or the Gamma Quadrant, and he gets help from another Ferengi who may not be all that they seem. Would that work?
Yeah, I think that does it. Yeah. And tula berries. I've got one word for you. Tula berries.
Oh, yeah.
Here's some facts from our memory banks about the episode, and feel free to jump in with any comments you might have. This episode originally began life as a pitch for TNG when Bader was writing on that show. And originally, Pell would be involved with Riker somehow, and Crusher would be filling the Dax role, sharing Pell's secret. And I feel like, Riker gets involved with a female ... was probably a pitch the TNG writers heard a lot in those days.
Yeah, I would think so. I can't imagine that. I mean, I don't know. Like Riker and a female Ferengi is kind of an interesting pairing, I guess.
Yeah,
but
sure.
I'm not sure it would have had the weight that it does on DS9.
Yeah, luckily they saved it for a better opportunity. This episode, the very colorful and distinct Dosi makeup was designed by Michael Westmore, and he based the design on colorations used by tribes in Borneo and the South Seas. And for the Dosi design, as well as the many other aliens we see in the episode, this episode was nominated for an Emmy Award for Outstanding Individual Achievement in Makeup for a Series. This is an episode of a few firsts for the franchise. It's the first time that we see Tango being played, which just looks like the most complicated game. Like, I have no clue what's going on.
Yeah, it looks like a very involved poker.
Yeah, right, exactly. Like, right, if arguably we might be there already, but like if our, capitalism reaches a galactic scale, like our monopoly would be very confusing, I'm sure.
Right.
Like the way that Tango is. And I'm sure that the home version comes with, a separate box just for the rules. I'm sure too that, when you play with the Grand Nagus, it's probably customary to let him win or at least ignore his egregious cheating.
Yeah, I would assume so.
Yeah, it's some cards fall out of his sleeve and it's like, oh, I'll just pick those up for you. Where'd those come from? Yeah. This is the first on-screen appearance of a Ferengi female in the franchise. The only other Ferengi female we see on the series is, of course, Raman Quark's mother, Ishka, which is a shame because Ishka and Pel are great characters. I would have liked to have seen more of them. It's also the first episode to feature a character cross-dressing for most of the episode. This would happen again with Quark in Prophet and Lace, which I think probably the less said, the better about that episode. I would say that generally the writers and producers of the show feel like this episode did not hit exactly the way that they wanted it to. Mm-hmm. And they have a couple different reasons for that, but I think that it's, it promises a lot and we don't necessarily follow up on some of those promises right away.
Right.
It sort of opens up the world of the Gamma Quadrant, which is, very strange compared to what we're used to. And you've got a great character like Pel, who seems like we're really going to go somewhere with that. And then, of course, we don't know this, but we'll never see her again. And I think that's too bad. That's a shame.
Yeah.
Part of that suggestion is, of course, the first mention of the Dominion in DS9. And according to Ira Stephen Bear, they didn't really have an idea of the Dominion as the uber antagonist that they would eventually become at this point. But they did want to seed the idea of something larger on the horizon, a kind of an anti-federation that controlled the unexplored space of the Gamma Quadrant. Proofreading is important. During the first broadcast of this episode, the title was misspelled. They left out the Q in acquisition, that pesky Q, and the title was fixed for subsequent broadcasts. And the titular rules of acquisition fittingly get a real workout in this episode. Ira Stephen Bear created the idea of the rules at the start of the series, and subsequent writers had contributed to them over the years. They were first mentioned in the DS9 Season 1 episode, The Nagus, and they were also mentioned in the 7th season TNG episode, Firstborn. Chronologically, they were first mentioned in the first season Enterprise episode, Acquisition. 49 official rules are heard on screen in the franchise, while another 31 unofficial or implied rules are also heard, and there are many other rules listed in unofficial and tie-in media. Rules 21, 22, 33, 48, 59, 62, and 103 are quoted in this episode. Let's talk about the guest stars in this episode, and there's a few. Helene Udy appears as Pel in the episode. Udy is probably best known for her portrayal of Myra Bing on the CBS series Dr. Quinn Medicine Woman. She also had roles in the 80s horror films The Dead Zone and My Bloody Valentine. She wrote and directed the film Naked in the Cold Sun in 1997, and she's currently working as a producer in Hollywood. And Dr. Quinn was definitely a big thing when I was young, but it's one of those things I just never really got into. Did you ever see Dr. Quinn?
I did. I watched it occasionally. Again, it was one of those things that was around when I was younger, and so it was kind of, I would turn on the TV and it would be on, and I would watch it. It was one of those kind of situations.
Now that it looks like the pandemic is going to continue for a while, maybe I'll put that on my binge list.
Yeah.
I'm sure you can find it somewhere at streaming services.
Oh, sure.
Brian Thompson appears as Inglatu, and we often talk about, quote-unquote, that guys on this show, that is, actors who appear in a lot of projects, and you don't quite know their name, but you go, it's that guy. And Thompson's definitely one of those. He got his start in a bit part in The Terminator in 1984, and he went on to play tough guys and heavies in a bevy of films and TV shows. He appeared perhaps most notably as the nameless alien bounty hunter in 9 episodes of The X-Files. In 2014, he wrote, directed, and starred in The Expendables, a parody of films like The Expendables, and it was based on his experiences in action films. In the Trek franchise, he's appeared as a Klingon, a Dosi, a Jem'Hadar, and a Romulan on TNG, DS9, and Enterprise. He also appeared as Klingon helmsman in the 1994 film Star Trek Generations, and he's active in the fan and Star Trek convention community. Emilia Crowe appears as Zairi in the episode. Crowe made her film debut in Brian De Palma's Scarface and went on to appear in several films in the 80s and early 90s, but Rules of Acquisition is her last screen credit.
Oh, wow.
Maybe she had to wear all that makeup and she was like, there's a lot of things I can do with my life. I don't have to do this. Tiny Ron appears as my hairdo. Ron, born Ron Taylor, was drafted by the Seattle Supersonics in 1969, but never got any playtime in the NBA. Instead, he ended up playing for several teams in the American Basketball Association until he decided to become an actor in 1972. The ABA, as a scrappy competitor to the NBA, was depicted in the 2008 Will Ferrell movie Semi-Pro. He first appeared, or maybe not, on the 1982 TV series Police Squad, starring Leslie Nielsen and Alan North. Ron played Al, the extremely tall officer whose head is always cut out of shot above the frame. Ron would go on to reprise the role of Al in the 1988 film version of Police Squad, The Naked Gun, as well as appearing in films such as The Rocketeer, Roadhouse, and Ace Ventura: Pet Detective. Ron appeared as my hairdo in 7 episodes of DS9. He passed away last year at the age of 72. And finally, Wallace Shawn appears as Zek. Shawn's credits are legion and can't be fully recounted here, but suffice it to say that he's an actor, playwright, and screenwriter who's been in the business for over 50 years. Shawn first rose to prominence when he wrote and starred in the 1981 film My Dinner with Andre and went on to a plethora of live-action and voiceover roles. Continuing to this day, he currently plays the recurring role of Dr. Sturgis on the CBS series Young Sheldon and is known for his roles in The Princess Bride, The Incredibles, Clueless, and the Toy Story franchise. And as an actor, I think it really shows that character actors are, the backbone of Hollywood. You can be can be a square-jawed, windswept hair leading man, but we're always going to need interesting voices, and he has definitely taken that all the way to the bank by just working constantly since he first entered the industry.
Yeah, he really has. I mean, I love that he could do My Dinner with Andre and then also be the Grand Nagus. Like that's range to me.
And to me, I don't know the background of his casting specifically as a Nagus, but it just seems like one of those dream gets where you go, I got this idea for this character. He's really weird and quirky. Like a Wallace Shawn type. Wait a minute. Could we get Wallace Shawn? Call Wallace. Maybe we could get Wallace Shawn for this. And I very quickly wanted to make an observation. It's really hard to give credit to everybody involved in an episode. I usually focus on the actors that people will recognize or who have appeared on Star Trek a lot. But I noticed something when I was preparing for this episode. They always list on Memory Alpha and on IMDb the uncredited performers. And there are several uncredited performers who have very interesting names. Maybe they're stage names, but check this out. A woman named Ivy Borg plays Rita Tannenbaum, who is a recurring character, a background character on DS9. Robert Coffey is a Bajoran civilian. Jenny Dreams is an operations ensign. And, of course, we've got Emilia Crowe. So a Crow, a Borg, Dreams, and Coffey walk into Quarks would be the start of an interesting joke. I also wanted to mention that Kevin Gravu appears as an ops officer, and Kevin is known for his very deep basso profundo voice and for co-creating and appearing in films such as Underworld and I, Frankenstein. He's appeared many times on DS9 and in the film Generations as well. Well, let's get into talking about the episode itself. And as we discussed at the beginning of the show, the Ferengi they're such an interesting idea and an interesting creation in the Trek universe. And I think that there is absolutely room in the Trek universe for lots of different races and characters. But if you just go off of, for instance, what you see in TOS, you've got TOS, it's about heroic captains, it's about dastardly villains. Every once in a while you run into a Cyrano Jones or a Harry Mudd. But to have an entire race that, was originally created to be like these villainous bad guys, but to have a whole race that is basically like comedy joke characters.
Yeah.
You wouldn't think now because they're so successful and well loved, but I think it was kind of a gamble back then.
Yeah, I think so for sure. I mean, especially coming off of, TNG, where, like I said, it was sort of like they were kind of correcting their mistake. And then to just say,
Yeah.
hey, you know what, we're just going to go full ahead with this. We're going to make Quark a main character. I think that was cool of them. And I think, personally, I think it paid off, but I like the Ferengi, so.
Yeah, you create them, and it turns out that they're a little too silly to be reliable bad guys. So it's like,
Right.
how do we recast these guys? And I think they did a great job. And I'm not sure if they were created by Gene Roddenberry and Herbert Wright, a producer on the show. I'm not sure if they were intended to be initially a sort of critique on Americans, modern Americans, and like greed, read capitalism. But they certainly slotted into that role as they got into DS9. The first show that we could really address like economic concerns. In Star Trek, they always say like, "Oh, we don't have money." And it's like, well, great. I guess I'm going to pick up the check. Like, how does that work in a society? And DS9, which literally the station itself exists at this crossroads of all these different races. We're going to have to talk about economics. We're going to have to talk about money, and having them as a sort of player in that environment, I think is just a really great choice.
Yeah, I agree. Especially, what I like about this episode is how it shows them, going into the Gamma Quadrant, and sort of, they're coming at it as Ferengi, and they're like, oh, we need to get our foothold in there, and we're gonna, that we're gonna kind of expand our empire. But it's interesting to see that as them as sort of like this capitalist maneuver.
Yeah.
You associate that with Star Trek, but it's like, yeah, that you're gonna have all of these different cultures kind of maneuvering to get in there and to have their own interests represented. And so it was interesting to kind of see that, have it kind of almost introduced through the Ferengi. I thought was kind of an interesting choice.
Yeah, and they're really the only ones that can do it.
Yeah.
I think just from behind the scenes perspective, like the writers weren't willing to they wanted to establish the world of DS9 before they went out into the Gamma Quadrant. But I think it's perfect that the economic interests are the first to get there. Like the Federation and Cisco can sort of, look through the wormhole and go, it's a lot of space out there, and someday we'll have to explore it and send diplomats and everything. But of course, the economic concerns are like, okay, what are we going to sell these guys? Let's get some tula berries. Let's get some wine. Let's. I think that's perfect commentary.
Yeah.
The Ferengi, they're all in on galactic capitalism, and we see the negative effects that it's had on their society, and they think they've got it all figured out. But then they meet the Dosi, who are maybe even more all in, like they are willing seemingly to commit violence to achieve their economic ends.
Yes, I love that as a contrast, honestly.
Yeah, right.
It looks like they met their match when they went through the wormhole.
Yeah, we're a little annoyed by Quark, changing out the sand peas, for the low carb beans or whatever, or overcharging us on drinks. But we could have the Dosai who are like flipping over tables, if we don't pay the bill. It could be a lot worse. There's always a bigger fish in capitalism. I find it fascinating that Dax in the episode is totally cool with the Ferengi. And she's an interesting, unique character because she has this unique perspective on life and on the galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy as a whole, because she's been around for so long. And I don't know if she's got a timeshare on Ferengi or she's trading on the exchange, but she's got all these years of perspective, and she seems to have a lot of patience for Quark and his schemes.
Yeah, I like that about her. I feel like it's because she's lived so long. Like you were saying, she's had so many experiences. She's able to sort of look past their flaws. Like she kind of tells Kira, well, if you can get over like the fact that they're misogynist and they're greedy and they're annoying, they're actually a lot of fun. And it's kind of like she's been around so long that she's just like, yeah, I can just throw out all the bad stuff and I'll just focus on the good with these guys.
There's a really long list of things you have to get over, but if you can,
that's a hard sell, but she's able to do it.
They're great people. Yeah. I think just having that perspective and knowing that, like, hey, I've seen races, societies like this before. They're going to grow out of this.
Right.
It doesn't matter to me. Like, I'll meet up with them again in a few hundred years. Dax is that person who can be friends with somebody that she doesn't agree with politically.
Yeah, for sure.
Which is difficult.
Yeah.
Of course, her being open-minded means that she's going to put up with a lot of butt pinches and sexual harassment. But apparently she's okay with that, I guess.
Yeah.
This is like, when I think about like, the Federation and their ideals, like, presumably this is what the Federation is all about, I'd imagine.
Mm-hmm.
Their policy on worlds who don't share their values. I'm sure they'd like to see all Ferengi females clothed and in control of their own financial futures, but for now they have to resort to being good examples and putting positive pressure on races whose human rights policies are questionable.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think it kind of shows, I don't know, the sort of difficult position they're in a way.
Mm-hmm.
So they have to interact with these Ferengi, and they never get to interact with female Ferengi.
Right.
For that reason. And it's kind of like, you really see that. I thought that was something the episode did, where you kind of really get to see the contrast between the Ferengi, and then you have Dax, and you have Kira, and you even have the female Dosai, who are all these sort of strong women that sort of throw down.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like, it's sort of saying like, look, the Ferengi, so obviously the Ferengi are going to be the same way if they would just get over their problems, their BS.
That's interesting. Like,
Yeah.
Is there some new level that you can get to with your economic strategies that like everybody's equal, and then we can all beat up the people we're trying to buy things from together?
Right.
It's kind of like a society-wide prime directive, I think.
Yeah.
Like, I wonder if there's like a zeroth directive with the Federation, which says, we can't forcefully interfere or intervene in other societies, but the goal is always to try to get our egalitarianism to rub off on other cultures.
I would guess so. I guess they're kind of hoping that they just, like you said, they just act as an example long enough and just sort of annoy people into changing, maybe, or at least in terms of the Ferengi. I know that Quark's always complaining about how annoying the Federation is, but he kind of adapts some of their attitudes,
Yeah, he talks about how insidious they are, in a later episode. And we see that sort of soft pressure on display early on in the episode when I think it's great that it's such like a mob boss thing or something when Zek comes to Cisco and he's like, I'm going to be operating in your territory and I'm going to use DS9 as a convention center for all these people coming in. And then of course his first thing is like, let me grease the wheels and offer a bribe. And Cisco kind of guides him to like, yeah, but you're going to like give it away. Like it's going to be a charity. And he's like, I don't see any profit in charity. Yeah.
I was like, he almost has to teach him what a bribe is.
Right.
He's so blinded by capitalism that he can't even do a bribe properly.
Yeah. I'm not going to buy this for cost. The idea is you're going to give it away. Yeah. But they get there eventually. Speaking of Dax, as a Trill symbiont, Dax's sexuality is fluid. And we see in episodes like Rejoined, this on display. Rejoined really gets called out as the episode that establishes that gay and lesbian people are accepted in the Federation. But this episode is like kind of the low-key precursor to that, based on Dax's active suggestion that she thinks Pell is in love with Quark, and she's cool with it.
Yeah, I had that exact same thought. And I'd kind of forgotten about that. I remember it's been a while since I'd seen the episode, and I remember Dax, figured out something about Pell, but I totally forgot that what she figured out was that Pell was in love with Quark and not that Pell is a woman.
Yeah.
And I actually love that scene where she's like, "You're a woman," it's like it's like a one little line that does so much in terms of showing how gay people are accepted in the Federation and just like how it's not a big deal, which I thought was really cool how they did that.
And Dax, with her perspective, and she's very intuitive, so she picks up on this affection that Pell has. But nobody's seen a Ferengi female, so she has no experience in that regard to go, oh, wait, I think she's a girl. Yeah. The Dosi woman seems fine with it, too.
Yeah. I was thinking that, too. She was just whatever.
Yeah. I don't know what kind of society this is that's like completely obsessed with capital, but like they're like, men and women are equal and anybody can date anybody they want. And also I'm going to stab you in the neck. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like pure anarcho-capitalism or something.
Yeah. Emphasis on the anarcho. Yeah. She's surprised by the fact that Pell's a woman. I think you can chalk it up to Dax's open-mindedness, but I think that, Rejoined will then take the ball later and run with it, that the future is free from sexual discrimination. What I wonder, though, is what the Ferengi think of same-sex relationships. Their men and their women seem to spend so much time apart. because
Yeah.
females aren't allowed to leave the planet. I mean, the population of their planet must be 99% female. You know, like if all the men are off on business trips and all the women, I guess, are home on Ferengi.
That's true. Yeah, I feel like I wonder if it's one of those things where like they just don't pay attention to what the women are doing. So the women are off having relationships and having these lives while the men are off thinking they're having all the adventures. Um, and that's how the Ferengi females, I don't know, should we call them women or females? They call themselves females.
Well, I guess they call themselves females, yeah.
Yeah. They're kind of, that's how they're sort of developing their own sort of secret culture that the men aren't aware of.
Yeah. I definitely think that Ishka would be seen as a pioneer in a more egalitarian Ferengi society if they ever reach that point. But and she seems like that on the show, but I think I can imagine a sort of black market among the women on Ferengi, like buying and trading capital and, like you said, having these relationships. You know, Quark resists Pel's advances, but we don't get the idea that he's disgusted by them necessarily. He's just like focused on their economic mission.
Right.
And it wouldn't surprise me if there are arrangements between both Ferengi men and Ferengi women.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me either. I mean, at the end of the day, their goal is capital, is to earn profit, and you can earn more profit if you're letting 50% of the population get involved. So.
Yeah. There's a heavy element of toxic masculinity in Ferengi society, but I could almost see it being like, they doth protest a little too much.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like I could see some business trips getting romantic.
On
those long space nights. Yeah. Like Dax, Quark is more surprised that Pel is a woman than that she's attracted to him. And I think Pel is a great character. I wish we could have seen her again. I like the fact that even as Zek is sort of dangling Quark out, as a patsy for his real plan, she sees through it. She sees that the Tula berries aren't important. It's getting close to the real players, the Dominion.
Right. Yeah, I would have loved to have seen like follow episodes with her, especially since she goes off into the Gamma Quadrant to basically kind of do her own thing. And it would have been interesting to see kind of how she establishes herself out there, how that would affect future Ferengis coming in there. If the people's first real interaction is with a woman,
right?
They're gonna be used to dealing with a woman Ferengi. What's going to happen when you're just a bunch of guys? There's a lot of interesting stories that could have been told there that the show didn't really. They kind of dropped the ball on, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's true of a lot of Gamma Quadrant stories. And when you look at the galaxy map and you go, we want these two halves or quarters of the galaxy, you're really setting yourself up. But it seems like the Gamma Quadrant's like where they go to have a weird planet episode. But all the political maneuverings are mostly going on DS9. Right. I like your idea. I want to spin off with Pel just out there, exploring the Gamma Quadrant, acquiring.
Yeah.
Getting maybe a dosy sidekick, showing her the ropes.
Yeah, this needs to be the next Star Trek series.
Yeah, I think so. I think she's a tragic character in a lot of ways. She's somebody who's clearly very capable at the Ferengi way of negotiation and acquisition. And like a lot of women in business, she has to be even better than the people that she's up against to break that glass ceiling. And she's always hustling, like we see with the sand piece at the beginning, and she knows all the rules of acquisition down pat. But of course, it's a crushing ideology that the Ferengi have, and thinking about her continuing to have to strive against it is depressing.
Yeah,
I think it's really like that's what makes it so attractive, like the idea of her just going off and just doing her own thing in the Gamma Quadrant.
Yeah, I agree.
Buying a planet.
Yeah.
Taking over the Dominion.
Yeah.
I had a weird thought watching this episode that I never had before. Especially it has to do with like the fact that she's got these, like, I don't know if they're latex. They probably have something better in the future. These latex fake ears. And the Ferengi ears are technically like secondary sex characteristics. And they're also an erogenous zone, and they've just got them hanging out there for everybody to see. And they brag about their size. I think the icky parallels are clear. And that just struck me for some reason in this episode. Like, oh, gross.
Yeah, but they put them on display, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, they do. Plus, if you're Rom and you're going through your brother's room and you find a fake set of ears, is it like finding Derek Small's cucumber in Spinal Tap, or Or like butt padding or something like that? Is it like, oh,
Yeah, that makes me wonder if male Ferengi would use prosthetic lobes to make themselves, be bigger, more impressive. And that's actually how she got them. In which case, it seems like there could be a whole market for that. That's where she should be making her money.
just invest in that and you're good to go. There's definitely a lot of commercials on late night Ferengi TV about ear pills and making up for your shortcomings.
Right.
I love the rules of acquisition. It's such a it's a thing that's so it's so good at getting across, I think, the point of what the Ferengi represent. But it's also such a nerdy thing too. Like nerds love their wikis, they love their facts and knowing all the ships. And a true DS9 fan, I'm sure, knows all the rules of acquisition that we've seen on the show.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. Wasn't there a book that was published at some point while DS9 was on that purported to be the full list of the rules of acquisition?
I think so. It sounds like something that they do. Yeah. The rules, what gets me about the rules is that they really fit into this idea of the business books that you see, in the airport, or the idea that there's some trick to beating everybody else to the gold or the latinum in this case. This sweaty idea of capitalism. It's like Zig Ziglar or Tony Robbins. You always look somebody in the eye and shake their hand. Keep clients waiting as a power move.
I had actually not made that connection, but that makes a lot of sense. That they're basically like a self-help book that has become a religion.
Yeah.
Which is actually really kind of cool little world building detail.
Yeah, the religious aspect is really interesting as well. The fact that they have enshrined these things, and that makes it all the worse when Zek gets his bump on the head or whatever happens to him in a later episode, and he's like, "I've got some new rules. Be nice to everybody. Give to charity." Yeah. Everyone's like, "What are you talking about? We can't do that." I think it's in the Enterprise episode, and I don't think they thought about it too much, but they sort of let it slip that there's fewer rules. There's like 178 or something like that. So over the course of 200 years, this is a text that they're constantly adding to. And I think I remember in the episode Pell saying that she knows all the rules and she's read all the commentaries on the rules as well. Yeah. And I know that it's always kind of iffy to compare them to the Jews, which I think they are unfavorably a lot. I don't necessarily agree with that interpretation, especially when they're played by Jewish actors.
Yeah.
Almost all the Ferengi.
That definitely gives them sort of a problematic element. Yeah.
But I think that, but it is, just the idea of having these holy rules, and then also like, well, we've interpreted these in a lot of ways. It does sort of fit into the Jewish tradition of the commentaries, on the Torah, and people having to like, you're never done studying this. Like it really is like an obsessive kind of religion. But there must be Ferengi. Maybe there's Ferengis who are like, screw the rules. I'm going to go it on my own. I got a system.
There's got to be, right?
People are just going out there like, forget about that. I do the opposite of the rules. It works for me.
Yeah.
Make latinum from home for 2 hours a day. Is there a scene, a moment, or a character that really stands out for you in this episode?
Honestly, the scene that really stands out for me, we already talked about, which is when Dax figures out, or when Dax learns that Pell is a woman, that exchange. And I actually just really like the way they're sitting there talking, because to me, it comes across, and partly it's because I already know Pell is a woman, but they're kind of coming across as like these two sort of outsiders. They're sort of like almost like outsiders to Ferengi culture, and they're like girlfriends having brunch. Which I just really like that vibe a lot. So that was always the scene that that sort of stuck out with me, that I really enjoy.
I can see Dax relating to her as an outsider for sure. Also, because I kind of wonder, like, why is she butting into this? but as we establish in this episode and other ones, like she's Quark's friend, and so. Yeah. she sees somebody who likes her friend. She's like, I'm going to check this person out and going to see what their deal is.
Maybe play matchmaker a little bit too.
Yeah, sure. She's not above that. I also like the fact, it's just a little thing, but I like the fact that they're in the Replimat, and Pell mentions that she likes to try new things.
Yeah.
And that doesn't necessarily mean anything if we don't know her secret, but we're like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense that she'd want to like, oh, cheeseburger, let's try that.
Yeah, it totally does.
Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about or cover with this episode?
The one thing I just thought was kind of cool about this episode was the fact that they introduced, I mean, I know you mentioned it earlier, but this was where they bring up the Dominion. And I like that the introduction of that is just sort of like a throwaway line in a silly Ferengi episode, or what, is more or less a silly Ferengi episode. And it was really interesting to me that you said when they wrote it, they weren't necessarily expecting it to be the big kind of villain, but to me, it's just like that worked out so perfectly that you seeded that in and you just kind of have a throwaway line. And then it's like, oh, wow, that's going to kind of build up to become a much bigger thing. Because I was watching this with my boyfriend, and he was like, when they got to that line, he's like, the Dominion, that sounds familiar.
Wait a minute.
Younger. And I was like, yeah, it becomes a big thing. And I was like, was this the first time they mentioned the Dominion? Was it this episode? That is crazy. Yeah. And I was really impressed with the sort of scene setting they did with that.
Yeah. It's so insidious, and it sort of works so well with how we, find out how the Dominion operates, in that someday I've got to have a civics professor on the show and like break down all the different governments of the Star Trek universe. But like they have like this laissez-faire kind of thing, which is not like the Roman Empire. Like nominally we control you. You can do whatever you want. You can live however you want, sell whatever you want. We get our cut of it, and then you just kind of do your own thing. But if you mess with us, we burn it down and we salt the earth, like that planet we see that has displeased the Dominion that Bashir goes to, and they've given him this horrible genetic virus that kills everybody.
Right.
They're willing to sort of back off and sit in the shadows and let things sort of play out as long as they nominally have the political control.
Mm-hmm.
Which is creepy. That's very scary.
Yeah. They're a good villain. Like that's one of the things that's really stood out to me about DS9.
Yeah.
Once they start really going with that.
I think my favorite scene in the episode is the ending scene, where I think to make Pell, to emphasize how good Pell is, we have to have Quark be kind of hapless in the episode. And we get the idea about Quark that maybe it's his own fault that he runs this bar. He knows the rules. He has a mind for he's got the lobes, but he gets the yips in like these important situations. He seems to kind of freeze up. Maybe he's not quite cut out for this. But of course, when the safety and the health of this new friend that he's made is challenged, he's able to stand up to Zek. And I like the idea that he throws back in Zek's face that line about how stupidity is no excuse. Just because you didn't know that you were getting advice from a female, you're going to go to the prison as well. I wonder what Ferengi female prison is like, or if they have like a male and female prison separately. They must. Oh,
they must. Yeah, they separate them in every other way.
And I also like the fact that, true to her aspirant nature, at the end, as they sort of sadly part, she's still like, you can give me those 10 bars of Latinum, though. I'll take those.
Oh, yeah. No, that was a great moment. And then she's like rubbing his lobes and like, okay, yeah, get it, girl. Like, you can use your feminine wiles and and profit like a man.
Yeah. I think it's probably good for the Ferengi society that she's going to the Gamma Quadrant, because I think a few more years she could really tear it up in there. Well, let's talk about my space dad can beat up your space dad. Who's your favorite captain and why?
Okay, so I always have to say Picard,
Sure.
just because I basically imprinted on TNG, and that's the one that I. But I think I also really like Picard. I was an English major. I'm an English nerd. I love his sort of Shakespearean vibe, because John because he's played by a Shakespearean actor, and I like just like kind of his focus on diplomacy. That's something that I think is really cool, and something I really like about TNG is that sometimes they'll literally just resolve conflict just by like having like just talking to each other, having like a meeting basically, and I just think that's kind of cool.
Yeah, the characters love Shakespeare on Star Trek, and I know that's a function of writers, TV writers who also have humanities degrees, but I wonder if in the future they've only have Shakespeare, like if, the Library of Congress burned in World War III and this is what they could get back, or if they've, because in Voyager, Janeway can look up a newspaper article about her ancestor from 1999, which is in the Delta Quadrant. So clearly their computer databases are comprehensive, even on board ship. But I wonder if they have the same appreciation for Shakespeare's contemporaries like Spenser and Marlowe. And if we're just not, headcanon, they're making references to Calderon or something like that, off screen. We're just seeing them talk about Shakespeare.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. I did like in the reboot movies where they call the Beastie Boys classical music.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would honestly like to see a little bit more of that in the shows, like pulling from literature and things, that were more recent than Shakespeare. But I also figured it probably, I'm getting outside of the canon per se, but I figured it's because Shakespeare's in the public domain, so they can put him to their heart's content, not have to worry about anything.
Yeah, they're doing that a little bit on some of the CBS shows like Discovery. Like they'll talk about I love David Bowie. Well, you can say that, but I don't think we're going to hear a David Bowie song on this show. That's going to be a little too expensive. Well, Picard it is then. All right, let's say that you are working on our ship. You've received a commission in the rank of ensign. What department on the ship would you work in?
Oh, that's a good question. I would okay, so this is getting super obscure, but sure. I remember that in the first season of TNG, they had a literature expert on their ship because it was in one of the holodeck episodes. They called in like a 20th century literature expert to help with one of the I don't remember exactly what it was. So if there are literature experts on these ships for whatever reason, that's probably where I would be. Or I would be in like linguistics, that kind of thing, communications. Sure. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. I have to, like all single serving characters on Star Trek, I have to warn you that something bad might be in your future.
Oh yeah, for sure. I can live with that.
We'll have a 20th century holodeck program where the holodeck breaks, and it's like we get to go to a concert. It's like, oh great, let's go. It's Altamont. Oh my God, we're gonna lose Ensign Clarke on this one.
Yeah.
Well, Ensign Clarke, thanks so much for joining me to talk about Star Trek and the Star Trek universe. If people want to continue the conversation, and they can at EISTpod on Twitter and the Enterprising Individuals Facebook page, where can people find you online?
The easiest way is to go to my website, CassandraRoseClarke.com. I have links to all my social media on there. I'm on Twitter. My Twitter handle is impossible to say because it is a pun. It's CRCCSEEORSEA. Just go to my website and click through that way. But I'm on Instagram and Facebook as well. But if you just search for me, you'll find me.
Great. And people can pick up Forget This Ever Happened now, wherever they get books. When is Shadows Have Offended coming out?
It is coming out next year sometime. I don't know the month, but I do know it's next year.
Okay. So people should keep an eye out for that. Thanks again, and we're signing off until the next mission. Hailing frequencies closed.
So Caliban, you finally show your face. Just in time for me to blow it off.
It's fitting you chose to hide in this abandoned movie theater, Mika and Hana, because for you, the show's over.
Big talk, but soon you'll be as dead as all the well-loved celebrities we lost this year.
When I'm done, they'll be cleaning you off the walls like COVID-19.
Wait, where's your face mask?
I thought we were going to fight outside.
Oh, come on!
I mean, if the murder hornets aren't out there still.
Take this.
You want to watch HBO Max on my phone?
I'll start cooking some beans in this old boot.
Just Enough Trope. News, reviews, and apocalyptic views every Monday on the Just Enough Trope Network.
Won't the 5G kill us?
Shh.